Okay. Okay. Looks like we're good. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm so excited today because Andy Hale is here, and we have talked about some important things that we want to go over with you all today. And we're going to take kind of a bit of a different approach. We've been talking a lot this week about making our dogs feel safe and supporting them emotionally and all of that. And of course, that's vitally important. That's the whole point of so much of what we've been talking about all week. However, we don't want to overlook the human side of it also, because what I'm hearing from a lot of you is that you really want to be supportive of your dog emotionally. You really want to take your time and slow down and not be, demanding and focus, as Andy said in his presentation, be just focused on getting the task done at all costs, regardless of what it's going to cost the dog. That really feels right to you in your gut, but you're getting, some negative feedback. And I get that. I understand that completely. People are saying, why do you want to treat your dog that way? You've got to be stricter with your dog. You've got to be more demanding. You've got to be the boss. And it kind of makes you feel like second guess yourself. Like maybe you're not doing the right thing, even though in your gut, your heart and your soul and your body is telling you that you don't want to do anything cruel to your dog. So I can't think of a better person to discuss this with than Andy Hale, because he not only has an incredible background in helping dogs, but he also started out helping people, and he has such a sensitivity and a compassion for the position that the person is in, as well as the position as the dog. So I'm so excited to discuss this with Andy. Andy, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so happy you're here.
Well, it's good to see you again, Marilyn, and thank you for putting on this event, because I've managed to catch up with some of the other speakers as well, and it's just proven to be a really good summit, really. And I think people are definitely there's a lot for people to take away from it, which is always great. And I think also hearing so many different voices with so many different aspects, but even covering some of the same thing, but coming at it from their own point of view. And that's the whole point of this, of course, is that, there's nothing new out there, really. It's just how we put it through our filters and the experiences that we've had that we can share with others. That's the key, so that we can, find the best way of learning how we can best advocate for the dog ultimately. And I think that'll kind of connect with our theme today a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's the whole point. We really, really want to be advocates for our dog, because if we're not there, saying to the dog, "I've got your back," who else is going to do it? So that's our responsibility. But sometimes it's hard to do that, especially when people around you are making you think twice about what you're doing, even though in your heart it's the right thing. People make you feel embarrassed, feel like you're incompetent, or I hate to use the word like stupid, and we feel that way when we get all of that negative feedback from around us. It's hard sometimes to put up with that and to keep pursuing what we believe in and what we believe is right. So without being defensive about it, because that doesn't feel good either, to get defensive. So what would you advise? What would you suggest to people? How can they be better about that and handle it a little bit easier?
Well, I think it's good to start off by recognizing that this applies to virtually every other part of our life as well, and in lots of other different situations, and also that we all experience it. So everybody should be able to relate. So it's no different to how we do our work, how we bring up our kids, what we're doing with our dogs, because it comes down ultimately to the judgments and expectations that we perceive. A lot of it is assumption, we don't know, from others, and how that affects us actually. And this is why I'm really, another kind of hat that I have on, especially for professionals, although I'm thinking about doing something for caregivers too, about our own emotional safety and actually our own emotional health, because we need to have healthy self-esteem. We need to have healthy boundaries, that we need to be able to stay in a good place ourselves so that we can navigate this stuff. Because guess what? If you're already feeling tired, exhausted, all the other things that can come sometimes, then we're more likely to feel the negativity that comes around us, really. And it gets a bit harder to navigate, and especially harder to advocate. So yes, I think that's important to recognize. And I think being a caregiver, Marilyn, caregiver burden. It doesn't matter whether it's for a child, for a relative, for a partner, or for your dog. Trying to turn up on a daily basis when society around you has decided that somehow there is a flaw here, that something is broken. Mm-hmm. It's challenging. And one thing I want to say to everybody, our dogs are not broken based on other people's version of normal. We've got to really remember that. It's important for us. So it's hard, So one thing to think about regarding emotional health generally, it's a bit like physical health, I think, Marilyn. You have to work at it. You have to work at it, and you have to find safe spaces to be nourished through it. You need to be able to offload where you feel you won't be judged, where you can have somebody who gets you, somebody who hears you. We need that. And that can be challenging for caregivers, Marilyn, because even within their own family, there will be those that will maybe be a bit more negative and a bit more dismissive. So the point is, it's tough. It's just tough. And I think, as I say, just like physical health, even if you're really keen to have a good diet and you exercise well, it doesn't mean you're not going to get coughs and colds and sprain your ankle or whatever it is. And it's the same with emotional health. We have to try and do the best we can. That's why having events like this summit, I know there's a lot of caregivers who have tuned into this, who have felt validated a lot of the time for how they feel already. And that's a big part of it, actually, Marilyn. I think it's important. So I think that's a good place to start, to recognize that it's not unique to us who have dogs with challenging presentations. I count myself in that. I have 3 dogs. Arthur, who's my older boy, he's my collie, guess what? My sensitive boy, he's 12 years old and he still struggles sometimes. And I see that in him. And this, I think, once we move ourselves away from seeing behavior on that good, bad continuum, that we kind of look at things. So I know, for example, that Arthur is always a good dog. It's just sometimes he copes less well. And that's up for me then to step in and advocate for him. And it was hard in the early days because, he's an older boy now and he kind of copes better. But in those early days when I had to persuade him that I was his return to safety, that he could navigate the world around him without kind of too much challenge, it was hard. And you do feel those judgments from others, Marion. And I think it's really important to recognize that we literally have a part of our brain that is attuned to the responses of others. Social pain is real, and we know that now. And I'd invite people to check out Matthew Lieberman's book, Social. He's from UCLA, and he's been doing a lot of the MRI research into that part of the brain, about that social rejection, social pain. It fires at the same part of the brain as physical pain. So it's really hard to navigate this stuff. The best thing, though, is when you are truly aware and acknowledge your dog's care and support needs and the challenges they have, that advocacy part of our brain, when we start to advocate, that's the best shield we have to the judgments and expectations of others, actually.
Yeah, I love that you said a minute ago that the dog isn't broken, but sometimes he copes less well. I think that's a wonderful distinction to make, because people get a little frustrated or disappointed when their dog's behavior doesn't measure up to their expectations. But looking at it from that perspective, that the dog is just coping less well, tells us that we have, as advocates and as caregivers and emotional supporters for our dogs, we need to get in there and do something to help them cope better. So I love that distinction. I think that that's something that's really important, I think, for folks to keep in mind when their dogs are not, living up to what they expect. And that's always going to happen. It's part of it.
And that's the key. The two big words are judgment and expectation for me. And there was a lesson here for all of us, actually, that we can gain, actually. And it's quite empowering when we seek to unshackle ourselves from the expectations and judgments of others. We are all victim to that. We are all potentially still connected to that teacher from school who told us we'd be no good, or whatever it is that tells us stuff. Because those judgments, not just the judgments of others, but how we judge ourselves and the expectations we put on ourselves. And if we really connect to that dog in front of us, and we allow ourselves to break away from some of these kind of conformist norms about the expectation of behavior, through that process, I think it frees us a little bit as well, Marilyn. I had an incident recently with Arthur where somebody came up and stroked him from behind. They just came up and just touched him from behind, so he lost it. The first thing I did was apologize to Arthur. And I got him out of there. Now the guy was kind of like saying to me, "Oh well, blah blah blah, your dog," blah, blah, all this kind of stuff, because obviously it shocked him. But I thought, who goes up to a dog and just touches them like that? It's nuts. But in the moment, part of my brain wanted to kind of have a bit of a go at him and put him in his place and tell him stuff. But instead, I just smiled and moved on, because I had to think about Arthur at that moment. This is the power of advocacy in that moment. It's like, I just need Arthur to move on. There's no point getting into an argument with somebody about what has just happened or not happened. So it happens to all of us, I think. But yes, I think there's a bigger life lesson for us when we start thinking in these terms, and recognizing how much we all bend ourselves into this notion of a conformist norm, which takes away a lot of our agency, right, and our ability to express need and communicate emotional need. This kind of push towards a conformist norm in our society, I would ask ourselves, well, how's it working for us? Because we've got record numbers of people with emotional health problems, record number of children with emotional health problems, because for some reason or other, our inability to allow people to express things is taken away because of the obsession with this notion of a behavioral norm. Same with dogs. I think there's a mirror there, just from society, as well as the unrealistic expectations and judgments we put on dogs. We used to have children should be seen and not heard. We've definitely had women should be seen and not heard, for sure. And we've ended up with dogs should be seen and not heard.
Yeah, and that can take a toll, I think, on emotional health. If you're thinking that expressing who you are and just expressing yourself is going to bring about negative consequences, that's scary. And especially for a child, still in that formative part of their life, and especially for our dogs who really depend on us for so much, for their emotional stability. They need to be seen and heard just the way the rest of us do. And I think your position on really hearing dogs, really looking at them, really hearing them, and responding to what they are really saying and what they really need, I think is key. I think is key. And I can think back to talk about behavioral norms. I can think back to years ago, still in the old traditional style of, dog training, very structured, very specific. The dog wasn't allowed to, go an inch out of line. And thinking back to that, and then thinking to now, that, the dogs that I have now pretty much do anything they want. And they never do anything bad, because there's just such a freedom that they kind of know what to expect. They're always checking in with me, not because I've trained them to do that, but because they want to. And I've worked very hard at being their safe place. So it is possible. And, I can certainly relate to that experience you had with Arthur, because I can turn into somebody very unpleasant if somebody tries to touch one of my dogs without my permission. Because if they do it without my permission, they've done it without the dog's permission. And that's not acceptable. The dogs have to consent to that. So yeah, I can totally identify with that. And I might have been tempted to say something, but maybe not. Maybe I would have just taken the high road and been more concerned about taking care of my dog first. And yeah, I can do that. People can deal with a little bit, if I turn my back on somebody and pay attention to the dog, it's up to the person to deal with that. I don't expect my dog to have to deal with somebody else's negativity. So yeah.
That's it. I think, we need to give ourselves grace enough to get it wrong sometimes, to lose our temper sometimes. We just do, right? And that's okay. But I think ultimately, when we navigate situations that are difficult, a lot of the advice, that I give to my clients is very similar advice to what I would have given to my human client. Well, my human clients now are still human, but you know what I mean, like clients where I was involved in human therapies and things, around how we are able to have some extra tools in our toolkit as we move forwards, and recognize that there's two things we know about humans. One is we love to judge. We absolutely love judging, and we often judge in the moment based on very little information. We just take a snapshot because our brain's designed to do that, Marilyn. That's the point. It makes those quick cognitive appraisals in the moment. But the second thing about us humans is we hate to be judged. And that's because we know our own lived experience is more complicated than what that person is judging us about. And we know our dog story, we know our own story. So we have to think about how we navigate that, because a lot of the stuff that people do in public, some of it's quite well-meaning, Marilyn. Mm-hmm. Because they just want to, when they're saying things like maybe you should do this and this, because they might be trying to help. Guess what? It doesn't necessarily feel like that. But so we just have to recognize about what can we do. We can't worry about other people, because they've got their own stories, their own narratives, their own things that are going on. We just have to start by recognizing, for example, for every person that knows you or comes in contact with you, there will be a different version of you, because everybody will have their own different expectations and judgments of you. So even if you start from that as a base, it just shows that we can't possibly fulfill any of those, even though often we try to. So actually, it's best to think, that people can think what they want. I just need to turn up as myself, and I need to turn up and advocate for my dog. And also another little thing that's a good little one to have in your toolkit is when we first hear something from somebody, especially what we might perceive as a negative thing, a criticism or something like that, our brain's first response is to think, what does that say about me? What are they saying about me? And we just need to train our brain, and you have to do this a lot, but it comes more quickly actually, to thinking, what does this say to me? So instead of about me, what does it say to me? What it says to me is, well, that person doesn't know anything about dogs. That person's never met me before. That dog doesn't know my dog's story. That's what it says to me. If I'm not careful, that first response will make it about me. And that's likely to be the response then when I'm going to shout back. Mm-hmm. So that's quite a helpful little thing to think about, I think. And also that bit of the brain that wants to make it about us is also likely to create quite destructive narratives. That's the part of the brain when we get home will be like, you can't do this, your dog's no good, this is embarrassing, you're letting your dog down, you're letting yourself down. That's why we have to take a breath, and we have to think about using a more descriptive language.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a great saying in human kind of psychology, which is feelings are not facts. So we do need to step back, and this is why we need more safe spaces, I think, for caregivers, and this is why I love the more care approach, because the task approach is more getting the task done. We talked about that before. The care approach is still about getting stuff done, but it just means about learning from the other first. That's the care approach, and that includes care for us as well. But I think there's less pressure with a care approach, because the trouble with the task approach, the more traditional approach, and that's nothing to do with methods and tools. You can still get stuck in that with positive reinforcement, of course, and a lot of the training stuff. If it doesn't work based upon a predestined goal, well, somebody must be to blame. That's how we end up feeling. I'm not good enough. My dog's not good enough. The trainer's not good enough. And it's really quite destructive, Marilyn, I think, and it doesn't help. So we need to move the dialogue on, especially working with sensitive dogs, reactive dogs, aggressive dogs, whatever term somebody wants, because when we take more of a care look and think, actually, this is about this dog's survival story. This is about this dog's, trying to communicate something regarding that environment that they are struggling to navigate well. Then the onus comes more upon recognizing that our sole job is as best as we can to offer care and support through that. And when things happen, that's just more feedback. Do you know what? Rover showed me today that was difficult for him or her. Not, oh, this is no good, I can't do it, I'm not, and the training's not working. So I think having this different outlook is more than just something a bit different. It's life-saving. Yeah. It's soul-saving. I think it's everything, really, because and it's a recognition that it's hard. I think this is the point. We went through a phase where it was like training would always have the answer. Train more, train more, train more, and everything will be okay. That might be okay for some dogs, but there are some dogs where their story's more complicated, their trauma's deeper, their inability to feel safe, or there is something physiological, visceral, emotional part of their story that we'll potentially never know. And that's okay, actually. And as far as I have caregivers who contact me who are like, I'm really upset because I've heard a lot of these discussions about safety and I don't think I'm keeping my dog safe because of this, this, and this. And my response to them is, you are totally helping your dog to feel safe because of this, this, and this, the other stuff that you're not seeing because you've been so persuaded that the most important thing is challenging that behavior.
Yeah. Make it stop instead of helping the dog to cope and addressing the need of the moment. And I love this idea that if one thing that you try doesn't work or has a disappointing outcome, it doesn't mean that you're a failure, that you are incompetent, or that the dog is a failure. It just means that wasn't the right thing at this moment for that dog. And there are so many other things that you can try. That's the beauty of this approach, is that we're always asking questions. What do you need in this moment? How can I help you right now? It's like asking the dog in front of you at this moment, what do you need from me now? What can I do to help you right in this moment? And it might be different in this moment than it might be a day from now, or different than it was yesterday. So we're always evolving, we're always changing, and we're always getting more information from the dog, and we have to adapt to it, because one thing doesn't work just means, let's try something else and then find the right thing.
And even actually being brave enough, especially as professionals, to say, it isn't the dog that's the issue here, it's the situation that we're expecting them to handle. And I think we have to be more honest and upfront about that, I think, because what happens a fair bit, is that if we go in with a notion that this is what is expected to happen, and lots of things are trialed, but we still can't get to the point where that dog's nervous system can cope with it. That's often where the professional's input just fizzles away. Whereas I think we have to be upfront and say, look, maybe this dog can't do that, and that's okay. Maybe we need to think about other things to look at. Like, so for example, I've been working with I've discharged them now, but relatively recently, I was working with an ex-puppy farm bitch who'd only ever known the puppy farm and given birth to how many puppies, I don't know, Marilyn. And it was pretty clear that this dog, deeply traumatized, couldn't cope with anything. And the caregivers felt that they had to take the dog out for walks and all the kind of things you're supposed to do. But it's pretty clear that actually that what that dog needed was to gradually build a safe world around them, which started at home. And so we removed all walks completely. There was no emphasis to think, oh yeah, we've got to get this dog used to walking out in the road, because that dog had a pen the size of, well, less bigger than this room. Now it had a lovely home with a big garden. Its world had gone like tenfold, which in itself is a lot to process, to deal with. And so I gave them permission not to do this stuff. We didn't have to spend a lot more time with this poor dog trying to get them to acclimatize to a world that they had no point of reference for. So we will revisit that from time to time. Let's say I've discharged them now. The dog's really happy with the male owner now, because that was part of the problem. Quite often these dogs struggle with men, and started playing, started sleeping properly, started eating properly. So I had to really persuade them not to do the walks. But after a couple of weeks, that dog really started to change within the home environment, because that nervous system had a chance to break down. And I see the support process from a professional point of view a bit like a train journey, really. At the beginning, we're all on the train, but we get off as professionals at some point. But we can get on again at any point in the future. And I plan to see them again, probably in 3 or 4 months, to see where they're at. And we can then invite the dog. Do you want to learn? Do you want to see a bit more of the world now? These stories are never the end. It's always an organic process, but it's deciding what you do and when you do it, I think, Marion. And that's why I love the principle of sensory mapping. We discussed this a little bit with my chat, of course, talking about the dog that the overseas dog that I was helping, and how we just allow those layers in bit by bit and keep getting feedback from the dog. Everything's feedback. I think that's the most important thing to recognize. Everything is feedback. And like you said earlier, Marilyn, if we get that feedback from the dog, we can't go too far wrong, even if that feedback is, I can't do it. Why is that less valid than I can? It is completely valid. Yeah.
I love that. Yes, I can't, I'm not ready. I need more time. All valid answers. And might not be the answer we were looking for, but it's still an answer and it's valid. And we have to acknowledge that with the dog, acknowledge the feeling in the moment, and then decide where to go from there. And there's so much that's been said about being your dog's safe place. And I think that's really the heart of all of it. If that's your primary responsibility, that you are your dog's safe place, then all of these other voices on the outside, we hear them, but as you said, they're talking to us, not about us. And
that's how we have to hear them. That's how we have to hear them, because otherwise it will bring you down. And I think it doesn't make it easy. I think that's the key point. It's still hard. We're going to have our bad days. We're going to have the days that we struggle with a little bit more. We talk about management and adaptation. For me, adaptation is just as much about adapting our own beliefs and our own expectations as it is about physically adapting. Because we have the 3 A's that kind of build into the 4th A, which is advocacy. The first A is awareness, and that's our job, I think, as a professional, to support that caregiver's awareness of what might be happening, because that caregiver probably has a different view, maybe, and especially because of the prevalence of the dominance model still, or whatever's going on around them. So we have to provide that awareness, and I think that's the one thing that's our job, really. And that's when I turn up, I think that is what I'm coming here to do. That protects me a little bit. I'm not putting pressure on myself, other than thinking I will help you with all the tools I have to become aware of your dog's care and support needs. The next day is acknowledgement, and that can be tricky for some people, Marilyn. It can be very tricky to acknowledge. The same thing applies with medical things. The vet might make you aware that your dog has chronic arthritis, but it can be hard to acknowledge that maybe our loved one is in pain and can't do the walks that we've been doing. It's tough. And we have to employ as many of our tools as we can to support that client into acknowledgement. We can't make them, though, Marilyn. This is important. This is to the professionals listening in. We can't force people to see stuff. We can just support space, hold space. And then the final A is the big one. And this is why it's so important that we support through that process, and that's acceptance. So they're aware of it, they've acknowledged it, and now they accept it. And to truly accept it means adaptation of our expectations, because when you think, I got this dog because I wanted to go down the beach every day and play frisbee and all that kind of stuff. When you accept that maybe that dog right now, who knows about the future, isn't that dog, or may never be that dog, that's a big thing. And there's a lot of stuff that comes with that, Marilyn, almost a grieving process, actually, for the dog that you didn't have. But the beautiful thing about acceptance is that puts you in the best place to advocate. Because now I'm like, I recognize that maybe half hour of my day out of 24 hours is not how I wanted it to be, or an hour of my day, but the rest of it is pretty amazing. And we can support clients then to focus in on the beautiful richness that is in that relationship. Often there are some challenging cases, Marilyn. I've got one at the moment on my books where it's tough, and I've got to be mindful of myself, really, because there's a lot of stuff going on. So we just look for those best outcomes. They might not be the outcomes that everybody wanted at the start, but it's how do we get that best outcome? And again, it comes back, I know I keep saying it, but it comes back to finding those safe spaces and providing them.
Right. Yeah. And I love that that collection of steps moving toward advocacy. And I agree that acceptance is the hard one, because if we really, it's hard to give up on something that you really want, or you expected, or an idea that you're holding because you've always believed that it was correct. And now to accept something that's different, or something that you didn't expect, can be hard. But I think what I found, not only for myself, but also, helping other people through this, is that if you are able to accept the reality of the moment, because as you said, it could change in the future, but accept the reality of the moment right now, there's a tremendous relief and freedom in doing that. Because when you're not accepting it, you're resisting. And resistance creates conflict, creates tension. And when you just accept it because it's there, and then, decide what your plan is moving forward, there's a great sense of freedom and a sense of relief when people do that. And I find that, I can watch the attitude of people change when they start. They're just, my dog is doing this and I want him to stop. And then they move to, we've worked this way, and maybe, there were some recurrences of that behavior, but we're moving forward, and here is the good thing that happened. Here are the successes. I can just see the whole change in the person's demeanor. They look hopeful, they look happy, they look pleased with what their dog is doing, and it can be a huge shift in someone's just state of mind, which is a really great thing to see.
Yeah, I totally hear you on that. And I think, especially when through that process of awareness, that's where we're pointing stuff out. Isn't it cool how your dog's done this? Isn't it cool how your dog's done that? That's the 5th time your dog's done that. Maybe that's a thing for your dog. So they really start to get a window into what their dog is trying to do with the world around them. And we discussed at my talk the thing about processing, engagement, and exits, because those are the 3 core bits for me that we look for. And I think the client often then feels invested in that process now, because they're not looking at a goal, which is how we used to do things, which is stop the dog barking at the dogs. That isn't what we set out as a goal. We set out as our kind of plan. How do we build that up? So actually that does happen often. We do get that, but that's not what we set ourselves out. We don't set a criteria based on an end result in some arbitrary way. We set our stall out on how do we learn more and more about this dog story? How do we learn more and more about getting that dog to be able to show us and still communicate? There's a big difference between a dog having a moment and having a meltdown. If that dog needs to have a woof, that dog needs to have a woof, as far as I'm concerned, because I'm not trying to suppress anything here. I'm trying to just remember, everything's feedback. And I look at my main measures moving forward isn't the arbitrary changing of behavior on or off. It's just seeing as we move forwards that we're supporting that dog's nervous system and their need for safety by, is this whatever the dog's experiencing less intense than it used to be? Is it less frequent than it used to be? And importantly, does the dog recover quicker? Because all those give me a sign that they're moving in the right direction, and that we can just keep adapting ourselves then, the environment and the things we do, to continue that sensory mapping process, so that the dog is showing us all the time, yeah, I can deal with this. But also, the dog can tell us, having a bad day today, I'm not feeling it. And that's okay. That's okay as well. Yeah. So, and I think it's important for professionals listening. I would invite anybody who's a professional, part of this thing about protecting our self-esteem, having healthy boundaries and keeping those so we can turn up in a well-regulated way, is being really clear before you even start what it is you're turning up to do. Because that is unwavering then. It's like, I know what I'm here, I know what I'm going to do. The perception of the other person is theirs to have, ultimately. We can't shoulder everything as a professional. It's too much. We do try to. I know many colleagues do, and that's where we burn out. Compassion fatigue is big, and compassion fatigue, the antidote to compassion fatigue is self-compassion. So if we are feeling the symptoms of compassion fatigue, that's a pretty good sign that we're not being compassionate with ourselves first. We're not looking after our own things that need to be in place. And I would argue we can't do our job very well unless we can start staying as well a regulated state as possible. It's one of the golden rules of human therapy, actually. I can't turn up to a session with another if I'm in a less well-regulated state myself, because you're just not concentrating, you're not focusing. So we have to learn these things more. We need more education on this, really, I think, about emotional well-being for us and emotional safety for us. It's important.
Yeah. And you mentioned also with the 3 pieces of the process, an exit. And can we talk about that a little bit? Because I think it's a concept that kind of goes against the old traditional approach to working with dogs, is giving the dog a safe exit. That concept came as a surprise to some of the folks, but once they understood the rationale behind it, it makes perfect sense. So can you talk a little bit about, giving the dogs and maybe even giving ourselves an exit, goes along with compassion, self-compassion.
It does. So I've come up with this kind of little, I don't know what you call it really, but way of looking at what it is to feel safe, the ability to process. the ability to engage on your terms and to have an exit. And actually, I think trauma is predominantly based in engagement and exit. Because when you find yourself not having agency over engagement and you can't exit from something sexually, physically, environmentally, whatever, then that's very traumatic. So exits are very important. And we tend to think of exits in terms of physical exits, but you know what? Emotional exits, social exits, mental exits, physically, they're all important. We need those things. We can all get ourselves stuck in an emotional situation and not feel we have an exit. And that's when it becomes problematic. So actually exits are hugely important. And they are for dogs. If you slow down and you do the observational stuff with dogs, I see it so often. I'm quite lucky, Marilyn, because I have a big space that I work in. So it's nearly 2 acres. And so I have time and space. And I can let the client dog kind of use that space to tell me stuff. And it's amazing how many of these dogs who, when they have the benefit of a longer line and they have more distance, instead of just instantly firing off, they are exiting. Even small exits, just that move to the left, that move to the right, that little look away, they're forms of exits. So supporting an exit for some of these dogs, I would say a proportion of the dogs I work with, supporting and reinforcing, if you want to use that term, exits is the key for that dog. We've got to move away with dogs, especially I work predominantly with dogs who struggle with dogs or people, but the dog is always in a fearful state. I don't always see that, actually. I see a dog where there is some aspect of that social engagement, if you like, the social environment that they struggle with. Some dogs, they want more time to process. They're quite sensitive. They need more time to process, but guess what? They've learned over time, engagement comes first. And they learn that young. Everybody wants to touch you. Dogs just run up to you. And it's tough. And also, some dogs, it's the engagement bit that they struggle with because they've had bad experiences around the engagement, or they haven't practiced it enough to feel confident with it. And many dogs, it's the lack of exit that's been the problem. Yeah. How many times do we see people with puppies, especially, and the puppy's backing off a bit, and they're like, "Come on, don't be silly, come and say hi." So where's the exits there? And I think there are some behaviors, when we think about submissive urination, even when we think about things like disassociative things, same for humans, I think, but when we have a perception of no exit, even though you could exit, you're just so used to having engagement as being the primary thing that you can't exit from. But you need to exit, but you feel you can't physically, so you exit some other way. And that can be, I think about dogs who do a lot of the abnormal repetitive behaviors, submissive urination, whatever. I think there's a lot to explore from those 3 words, because ultimately, when you think about our own need for safety, and ideally those 3 things shouldn't even be on our conscious thought when we already feel safe. We're still looking at all those things, but you're not so aware of it. You only need to find yourself in a slightly elevated state, then you'll be more aware of it. So, for example, you and I could go to a party at a friend's house, and we haven't even thought about it because it's a friend's house, right? And you and I, we left a party together, brilliant, we're off. It only needs for you to want to go home, and I don't want to. So therefore, your exit's taken away. Even something as simple as that, guess what? You're going to feel under pressure now. You're going to feel upset, angry, whatever it is, So even something as relatively benign as that, just knowing that a perceived exit's been taken away now becomes uncomfortable.
Yeah. And sometimes knowing that you have the exit is all that you need. You don't have to use it. You just have to know that it's there.
Yes.
And, there's so much. What are some of the ways that we take exits away from our dogs? How can we be more aware of what we're doing? Because sometimes it's just something as simple and normal as like what you were saying, you want to leave and I want to stay. And therefore so, what are some of the little things that we might do that deprive our dog of that feeling that they have the ability to exit if they want to?
I think virtually everything we do potentially has the risk of doing that, because You know, I live down here in Devon, very beautiful part of the UK, very big holiday place, but we live right down on the beach. The number of people who take their dogs out and the dogs just don't want to be there, or they've been there too long, or they're sat outside that pub or that cafe or whatever it is. Or, you know, we had a big air show here with airplanes and stuff, and it was horrible because a lot of the dogs were like, I don't want to be here, I can't, but they can't exit. They can't exit. I think training is a big one, Marilyn, without being too contentious here. We can expect our dogs to continue to comply to a situation through training. I saw a video not so long ago, actually, where somebody was trying to teach the dog something, and the dog was struggling to do it. So they were just, building up the reinforcing, changing the reinforcement schedules, and eventually the dog got it. But I felt that dog looked quite uncomfortable and was looking for exits, but they couldn't exit. So remember, there's a difference between what we're taught and what we learn. That dog got taught something, as in the task, but what did that dog actually learn about being able to say, actually, I can't right now, and actually I need to exit? Being on a lead is a big one. Just being on a lead, the dog is moving, but if that dog needs to move this way quite a bit, and I found that a lot of dogs I work with, just through observations, they do have a bias to their movement. They're like, I feel a bit under pressure here, I need to move this way. But if they hit the end of that lead pretty quick, that nervous system just gets sprung back. So the exit's not there. I share this quite a bit, actually. Some people have heard me mention this, but I was working with a dog that was lunging and barking at dogs. We did the setup in my nice big environment, took our time. It's all done with kind of walkie-talkies at distance and everything else is all done. And this dog, anything that entered that social environment, people and dogs, actually. People and dogs. This dog would sniff the ground and move to the left, sniff the ground every time. And I just keep putting question marks there. And guess what? I thought, my God, that's about the 10th time we've seen that now. So actually then, when we took that out into the real environment, the dog, the owners were very much into obedience. So they wanted the dog to walk to heel on the right. Great, if you're into obedience, but where's the dog's exit? By putting the dog onto a harness instead of the kind of half check collar that the dog had, and giving the dog a bit more lead, and controversially, allowing the dog ahead of them a bit. When we saw dogs in the environment, probably 8 out of 10 times now, the dog would just move to the left. That's all it was for that dog. Something as simple as that. And sometimes it can be the dog's relief from thinking, I just need to move a bit because I can't deal with it. So there's tons of examples of where we don't give dogs exits. Dogs who struggle when people come in the house. Laura Donaldson talks about this a lot. This notion of enforced immobilization. Making a dog stay somewhere, even if we're training, you're going to sit here with me and I'm going to give you some food. If that dog's primary thing out of those three things, processing, engagement, and exit, is to seek the exit, we're not giving them that.
Yeah. And I'm thinking back to many of the old obedience training exercises, which required the dogs to sit still or lie down without moving for a set period of time. And there were times when the owners or handlers had to actually go out of the dog's line of vision, but the dogs were still expected to stay there. And some couldn't, because the fact that they couldn't see their person any longer was just too much.
Yeah.
And so they couldn't do it. And back then we thought of it as a failure in obedience, but look at it very differently, I think, from another perspective.
And especially how much of these things are expected on these dogs when they're in adolescence, pre-18 months, when we know that the brain is different. It's just seeking safety, seeking those secure attachments, that part of the brain that needs to be there to help them modulate their kind of emotional experiences isn't there yet. There's so many things that we expected. And this comes back again to, I spoke to a lady recently who her dog, her kind of, I think 9-10 month old dog, has been excluded from dog training class because it's disruptive. This was hugely affected her because she was excluded from school some 30 odd years ago. So it triggered her because her and the dog were both being seen through the same lens, which is, well, you can't do this, therefore you're no good. So we have to be mindful about that. You know, some of my clients, this is the difference between attainment and achievement. The task orientated model is very much about attainment, what we are going to attain, the end result, without celebrating the achievement. You know, for many of my clients, the fact that that dog could go into that village hall even and not have a meltdown is an achievement. The fact the dog can even do something in that space is an achievement. But because they can't necessarily do something based on a clipboard and attain that thing, then they're not a good citizen or whatever the thing is. So we have to be mindful of that. And it does have an impact on people because it's okay us talking about these things that we've talked about today, and hopefully it's been helpful for others to hear some of this stuff. But, you know, the general public, we're all kind of at the mercy of our quivering self-esteem at times, our poor emotional health, the way that we've been browbeaten by the expectations and judgments often in our lives. So then when we end up in a situation where others are telling us that somehow our dog's no good, our dog will never do anything, our dog's not good for class, it's just tough. And I know there's plenty of people who do dog training classes differently, thankfully, who would have dealt with that dog and their caregiver a lot differently. But I think so the problem isn't our dogs. The problem isn't us as caregivers. The problem is societal. As I said at the beginning, our dogs are not broken based on another person's version of normal. It's just not, that's not the problem. So the problem is a societal view on the expectations of the behavior of the individual. And there's a bigger topic there to be had, of course, about why that is. But so we have to just zone back into the thing and think, you know what, nobody knows my dog better than I do. And that includes the professional that comes to help you. If you have a professional that works with you who isn't interested in your opinion, isn't interested in your experiences, I would consider whether you need to think about another professional, I think, because we should be, as professionals, humble enough to think, I need to learn from you too. I need to learn from you. I need to learn from your dog. Because everything is valid in that point, and everything's feedback, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah. And the basis of our responsibility as a professional is to listen. That comes first, to really, really listen. If we don't listen, we can't serve. So, and I've often said to people, if you're working with a professional trainer who makes you feel guilty or embarrassed or diminished in some way, then that is not serving your best interests. It's not the best interests of the dog, and certainly not for you if you're coming away from a class feeling like that. So probably the best thing to do is to seek out someone else who will make you feel more empowered, because that's our job, is to make our clients feel empowered so that they can help their dogs.
Sure.
Yeah.
And there's an extra element there, I think, just probably to finish off on, but it upsets me how a very small number within our professional community conduct themselves on social media. The reason I say that is because it's the general public who look in to these things, and they see trainers pulling other trainers down, picking up on things, people. I saw something recently where somebody shared something on their own business page, and somebody had to come and school them about something they got wrong and all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't look great. And I think we have to really think about that for the caregiver's point of view, because making a shift over to thinking about things in this way is really important. I think it's the one big thing we've got to support the society to shift into a more compassionate outlook, for sure. But that isn't serving us very well if they're seeing just a lot of stuff going on online. I just think it's something we all have to be mindful of. I have to think twice. I would love to dive in and give my opinion on some posts, but I don't, because I think, well, what does that actually serve? Actually, and I get it. I know we want to dive in, and also I would say those who use aversives and those who have a certain outlook, if I could have a discussion like this with them, and I have had, then that's great. But that isn't how it is. So I think it's more valuable for us to try and turn up in our own way and lead by example and give positive representation as a community about what we believe in, rather than necessarily trying to fight battles that we can't win, actually, often, because very few people, when somebody comes at you, says, oh my God, yes, you're totally right, I'm wrong, sorry, I'll change. It's very rare.
It's not going to happen. That's so true. You're not going to change someone's mind by just arguing about something, especially online, where what you print is there. It just stays there. So I 100%, I agree. I think those discussions, I think online is not the appropriate place for people to air their disputes like that, because the person who's looking for help from a trainer doesn't really come away with a very positive feeling about what's going on with trainers. But I think that what you said is absolutely 100% correct. We have to lead by example, and we have to just do what we believe in and let the results speak for themselves. If we can have if we can take dogs that are dysregulated and traumatized and work with them over time, not like 6-week program, your dog is going to be 100% cured. Work with them over time for as much time as it takes and see these gradual changes in the dog. That's the result that is going to answer all those questions. Because
Sure.
the task-based approach just is not going to cut it, unfortunately. With that thing, like you said, for some dogs, it's great and they do really well with it, and that's fine. But for dogs that are struggling with some kind of emotional dysregulation, that's not the first choice. Maybe it's sometime in the future, but not in the beginning. So
Remember, a care approach is still able to do tasks. It's just, for me, the big difference is task orientated. The task is the most important thing. So even though you might care, the task has to be done regardless. So the dog must stop barking, must stop pulling, must whatever it is that we're looking at doing. A care approach, you still end up thinking about task, but it is about learning from the other first and just having a care aspect. Somebody said to me, care first and task will follow. I love that. Because that's kind of what it's about. And I think we all know, even if you're just teaching a dog something. I spoke at a gun dog conference here recently in the UK, which is great because gun dog work is about task for sure. And I just talked about some of this stuff in a very neutral way, just talking about the importance of understanding these things, because actually, if you want performance, if you want task done well, you have to see beyond just making sure that dog is physically able. You have to make sure that they are emotionally able, because it's important. So actually, care first and the task will follow. We should have that on a t-shirt, because this is even something like that. If you care for that dog and understand their care and support needs, then they will learn better. They will perform better. When we think about Yerkes Dodson, that area that's called the zone of delusion, which is, so it's like a kind of a graph like this. So, over this side, you're not doing very much. And over this time, you're completely burnt out. And then you go up and getting a little bit more motivated and a little bit more kind of elevated. And that's the peak time to learn stuff. Past that, it's all downhill. So that bit past that is the zone of delusion. And that's where we can be. We think, if I train more, if I do more, then I'll get more. And actually, if you look at, I used a lot of quotes from a lot of the science in human psychology, human sports psychology, because that's where you need to look at. These elite athletes are not getting gold medals by training more. by doing more. They've already trained enough, right? They're getting it because they are more regulated. They are able to stay more focused. They are able to stay in the zone, in that zone of being able to unleash it when they're ready. There's a lot of misunderstanding that somehow, for example, if you're doing agility, that dog has to be really fizzy to do it. And in fact, it's probably the opposite. I think if your dog knows how to do it, if that dog can come up in a well-regulated state, and this is an important thing to finish on, there's a lot of confusion that being well-regulated is the same as calm. It's not. It's not. There's a difference between a dog who's fizzy but regulating it. In other words, they're able to control that feeling and are ready to go and are still cognitively present. And a dog who's so fizzy, they're just off on one. Same for us. You could totally be really angry and still stay well regulated because you're controlling that stuff. So I think that's important to mention, actually. And this happens a lot, especially with parents, of course, who are invited to co-regulate their children. Because that's not explained to them, they think, oh God, I'm so tired, I'm exhausted, my child's being a bit of a whatever at the moment, and I'm expected to stay calm. No, co-regulating means that despite how you feel, you can still stay in a regulated state. I think that's an important point. Yeah. And especially for those doing sports, because getting a dog in that well-regulated state is not the same as a dog turning up so just like not motivated. It's the opposite. So yeah, these are important things that we need to keep talking about, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that distinction between the being regulated and calm and being regulated and excited, that you can be in a high state of excitement and still be regulated. Yeah. I love that. I love that distinction, because I think in a lot of agility performance that point is missed. So that's great. Oh, Andy, the time flies, doesn't it? I mean, I just love these conversations. There's just so much that we've covered, and you've touched on so many really, really important things for us to keep in mind as we're working with our dogs. And I can't think of a better way to wind up this week of all these incredible discussions that we've been having. So I just want to let you know how much I appreciate you being here and sharing these very inspiring ideas with us. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for the event. I know how much these things can be, so thank you so much for kind of having me along.
Yeah. Okay. All right, we're going to say goodbye for now.
Bye.
Yes. All right, if it's going to let me end this live stream. Here we go. There we go.